is our first episode of Vault Business Podcast, and I have a dear friend of mine. He is actually my attorney, so we do retain his services. His name is Barco with Barco Law. I've known him since 2020. We've done a lot of great work together. Benny, introduce yourself, man. Give us a little information about you, man.
Thank you very much, Jose. Thank you for the invite. I'm a business, bankruptcy, and estate planning attorney, and I'm just happy to be here, and hopefully we can share some information.
Yeah, so that's great. So he said it. He's business, bankruptcy, estate planning attorney, and I want to share with you guys, he's my attorney. So the disclaimer here is that yes, I already work with him, and we're going to give some great information today about estate planning. But if you need more additional information, you would reach out to Benny, or you reach out to an attorney for specific instructions about estate planning. So, Benny, tell us a little bit about, how you help people in estate planning. How does that work for you?
Sure. So, basically it's a decision someone has to make as far as how they want their assets to be distributed upon their passing or incapacity, if they need assistance with that. And so there's a few options available that we're going to jump into, I think. And so it's just a decision to help streamline the process to avoid some pitfalls that hopefully we're going to cover.
Yeah. So this was surprising to me. So I read a CNBC article that 67% of Americans do not have an estate plan. I mean, does that surprise you, Benny?
No, not at all. I think that it's a decision that people put off as long as possible. I mean, it's very hard for, let's say, a husband and wife to decide, hey, we have some minor children. Who do we want to take care of the children if something were to happen to us? Or who do we want to be in charge of our estate if something happens to us? And so it's a decision that I think people just put off, and sometimes it's too late.
I know, but you would think, Benny, we live life every single day, but to not have a plan for our, death and who's going to acquire our assets, I mean, I would think that more people would be more prevalent to figure out, hey, you know what, I need to have a plan after death. Is this just something that people do not like to talk about death, in your opinion, or what do you think?
I think that's what it is, but when you go back and say, a plan, whether they know it or not, the state has a plan for everyone, and that's called intestate. And so if you don't have anything in place, we look at the state statute, and they say who gets what and who can be in charge of your estate. So whether you like it or not, you have a plan, but sometimes that plan that the state has for you may not be the plan you want.
Wow. Okay, so wait a minute. Let me back up here for a second. You're telling me that if I don't have a plan, that the state has a plan for me?
The state has a plan for you. You die what's called intestate, and your estate goes through the probate process. So, for example, by statute, your children, let's say if you're single and you have children, they're going to receive in equal shares. That's the state statute. You may not want that. You may want certain children to receive certain things. And so that's why it's important to look at a will or a trust, which we'll talk about.
Wow. That's amazing. I've heard of it, and I guess I didn't really think about it, but yeah, I guess, the state has a plan for you. If you don't plan for yourself, they have a plan for you, right? So that's amazing. And is that part of, we always talk about it, like everybody hears the word probate. Is that part of probate? Is that what you're talking about?
It is part of probate. So
okay.
Probate in general is a court-supervised process where the court supervises the distribution of your assets. The probate process typically lasts 9 to 12 months in California. An estate worth, let's say, $300,000, which in the Valley is maybe, one piece of real estate.
Right.
You're looking at spending $9,000 to $12,000 in court costs, attorney's fees, and appraisal fees. So the probate process can be quite expensive. And so, the difference here is if you don't have anything in place, as I mentioned, it's intestate. The court has a process for you. If you have a will and your estate is worth more than approximately $180,000, your will still has to go through the court-supervised probate process. And again, probate, there's cost involved, there's fees involved, and it takes quite a bit of time to get the property out of the probate process.
Wow. Okay, so this is kind of bringing back some memories, Benny. So a little while back, I purchased a piece of real estate, and the process had to go through probate, and they appointed an executor in a will. And what ends up happening is that it still had to go through the probate process. So I had to wait through the process before I actually purchased that property. Do you remember when I had that problem?
Yeah, I remember that exactly. So the executor is really who's in charge of the estate. And so the court is going to authorize that person to sell assets or distribute assets, but it's supervised. So the court has to, observe and oversee that process. And that's why, in your example, it took quite a while because the court process is not very fast.
No. I mean, it took me so long. It was, a headache. The seller was going through so many things, a lot of ups and downs. I want to say that I went through just the probate process that took me 6 months just to get the property into his name, even though we had a will. Like, at which point, like, I'm thinking to myself, like, well, the paper is there. Like, why is it that we have to go through this whole drug out process if we already know that the will is giving power to the son to sell me the property? But the way I haven't understood through the probate process, everything that you owe gets put in through the probate process because everybody wants to know if you owe money to somebody, right? Isn't that how that works?
Exactly. It's a public hearing. It's a public document that's filed, so everyone knows who gets what, who's in charge. Creditors are involved. Creditors get to see who receives what. So it's a process, and it's again, court supervised.
So even after your death, people are still going to come and say, hey, what is it that you owe me, like creditors?
They could, they could make a claim against the estate in the probate process. Yeah,
wow,
absolutely.
Wow. So I actually went through that process. It was a long process, but I'm glad that I went through because I learned a lot through that process. And I think going through those situations of probate actually taught me how important it is to be ready for actual estate planning. So I know that we went a little bit backwards in the sense that we talked a little bit about probate before we talked about this, but in your opinion, is it better to have a will or to have a trust, or what is it that's the first step for somebody to get this process started?
No, well, you look at two things. So we'll first talk about like a will-based estate plan. A will-based estate plan allows you to name someone who's going to be in charge of your estate. Okay. It also allows you to name someone or name individuals who are going to receive your estate. Well, as I mentioned, it still has to go through the probate process. A will has no effect until you die.
Okay.
And so that's a little bit about the will. Now, since it has to go through the probate process, we've talked about costs and fees involved. The other option is a revocable living trust-based estate plan. So with that, we put property in trust for your benefit during your lifetime. So you're still in charge of the property. You can sell the property. You can take loans against the property. It's your property. You're in charge. You're the initial trustee. But if something were to happen to you when you pass away, or if you become incapacitated, you can name a successor trustee to manage your estate during your lifetime for your benefit. And the big thing about the trust is that it goes into effect when you sign the document. In addition to that, it allows you to avoid the probate process. So a typical family, let's say they have one piece of real estate, it allows them to pass that piece of real estate to their heirs, whoever they want, outside of probate, minimizing costs and fees and time associated with a full probate.
So what you're saying is that even if I have a will, I still have to go through the probate process.
The value of the property is over 180 plus.
Wow. So it gets much deeper than this. It's not just, hey, I'm going to have a will for my stuff or my assets. I have to go a little bit deeper and have a trust, right? If I have a trust, then it's everything that I put in that trust has an executive, and they're going to know what to do with the stuff that I leave, right?
Yeah. It's referred to as a successor trustee, and that person has a fiduciary duty to carry out your wishes that you've included in your living trust. So that could be, selling the property or making monetary gifts. I want these grandchildren to receive $5,000 each, and then the rest distributed to my kids. So, you can do whatever you want. It's your estate. You decide what's needed, and then from there it would be distributed, and the successor trustee is required to distribute it upon your passing exactly as the documents.
And I can appoint anybody I want. I can appoint my child. I can appoint my mom.
Yep.
Or can I just have, like, let's say, for instance, my family doesn't get along and I don't want to, put anybody as my successor or somebody to distribute my assets in my trust. Can I appoint somebody else, or how does that work?
Yeah, you could appoint, friend, relative, a trusted advisor. If you don't have anyone or can't find anyone, some estates would look, let's say, a bank fiduciary to act as a trustee.
Okay.
And you're looking at, individuals with maybe a higher net worth or something like that because there's costs involved. But, most families that I deal with, they have a trusted relative or friend that they're going to ensure that their estate is distributed according to their wishes.
Gotcha. So like if we appointed an attorney, can you appoint an attorney as somebody to distribute all that stuff?
You can, but there are not a lot of attorneys that want to take on that fiduciary responsibility. So it's usually they would assist the successor trustee in that.
I see. So that's big. I mean, like, hey, you can appoint somebody that's smart, that understands, hey, you know what, this stuff has to be done. I know for me and my family, that's good. That's going to be me, right? Like for me, I understand the world of business and how things work. If in the event that, my dad were, to pass away, my mom would be there and I would make sure that everything gets distributed, correctly for her. Correct.
Yep.
Now, even though I'm appointed, since there's a surviving spouse, in that trust, she still has, or he still has, rights to that trust, right? So just because you appoint somebody doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones that are going to execute everything because you have a surviving spouse.
Yeah, typically in a married couple, they have, there's community property involved.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, you can only give away what you are entitled to. So
Okay.
in people who are married, when you have community property, as a spouse, I can only give away 50% of my community property.
Mm-hmm.
The remaining spouse is entitled at a minimum to 50% of the community property.
Wow.
So yes, so in that example, the spouse would still have a right to property, even though if they have separate trust, even though she may not be the successor trustee, husband can give away the entire estate if she has a community property.
Gotcha. I'm going to ask you a question, Benny, because this always comes up. We hear about it in the news. What is a trust fund, baby? Like whenever somebody says, "See, I had to have a trust fund," what is that?
You can have a property held in trust for someone. Let's say you put some parameters around that. You don't want your kid to receive a portion until they reach the age of 25
Okay.
or 35. And so during this time, they can receive certain amounts, and they can make it so there's 65, whatever the case is. But they can have distributions upon as they age and as they matures. Some people think that my 18-year-old shouldn't receive my $1 million house.
Okay.
Too young. I don't want them to receive
Makes
an
sense.
age 18. But it's held in trust for them until maybe they reach the age of 35 or whatever age they think is a reasonable, mature age for their kid.
Now, do you see that a lot? Do you see, trust fund kids or, people that do that a lot?
Well, I don't see that. My estates that I practice, that I deal with are all usually, under a couple $1 million down to, $500,000. We have one piece of real estate and, husband and wife work. And so it's not a large estate. Most of my estates are generally, basic, husband and wife, maybe 2 to 3 kids, 1 or 2 pieces of real estate. And that's it. That's the majority of people that I deal with.
Okay, so we're gonna go behind the curtain here, and I know you being as an attorney, you only say as much as you can. Like I'm not gonna hold you to
This
here.
is not legal advice.
No. But I'm saying, like, have you ever talked to an attorney friend from LA or maybe from a different state, New York, and like they have this big trust fund and they have this child and they're giving them all this money at a certain age? Have you ever heard of cases like that? Because we hear it in the news, right? We hear, hey, this kid has a $500,000 trust fund. Well, I don't even understand like how you give a child that much money. Like, how does it work?
Yeah, no, honestly, I don't even deal with those individuals that they have that. So I don't have much in terms of reaching out to other attorneys who have those types of funds.
So more we hear it in the news, right? Like we hear it with high, net worth clients that, have a lot of money and they pass away. They already have this allocated for, for their children to get the, this trust fund, and they're getting paid a monthly, or they can get a lump sum too, right?
Exactly.
Something like that. Whatever the trust decides that's how they're going to do it, right?
Yes.
So that's the whole reason of building out a trust, is making sure that, hey, everything is distributed correctly.
Correct. According to the initial trustees or the trustees' wishes.
Gotcha. Now, if you do not set this up, then you're leaving it to somebody else and you're leaving it vague, right? Now, upon your passing, what happens? I mean, like...
we go to the state statute. That's the intestate we talked about. So if you have nothing in place, we look at the state statute and it says, if you're married, this is what your spouse receives as far as community property or separate property. If you have children, this is what they receive. And so it's pretty drawn out as far as what the state has. And you may not want that. That's why it's important to have a will or a trust, because you get to decide who gets what.
Gotcha. Now, I say that because, I mean, we've seen, celebrity tragedies, happen. Like in 2016, Prince passes away, and he has 6 brothers and sisters. And they go through the probate process. So he didn't leave anything in place. No will, no trust. And it took them 6 years. Here, actually, in August of 2022, they've actually finalized and given the brothers and sisters. Who determines? Did the court determine that? Or
Yeah, so that was, I'm assuming, the state of Minnesota. And so, whatever the statute states in Minnesota as far as who gets what, that's when it would be determined.
Gotcha. Yeah. But I mean, for a family to go through this for 6 years after your brother's passed away, he's a legend, legendary singer, and not to have a idea of what to do after the fact. Do you think it's people just don't know, or just they just feel like they're gonna live forever? I mean, like Prince, you would have thought that he would have had something in place. So it's just
unfortunately, I think you would have thought that, but he may have just not wanted to make the decision as far as who gets what, and now he's got, I'm assuming family members, kind of jockeying for position as far as what piece of the pie they're going to get.
Wow. And then of course you always have family members come out, right?
Absolutely.
Like, hey, I'm Prince's third cousin from his mother's side, and I deserve this, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So another case actually that I remember, pretty vividly is Nipsey Hussle. So, Nipsey Hussle, passes away tragically in 2019. Unfortunately, he did not have a will or a trust. He had 2 children. And in this case, the way I remember it, and, doing some research myself, these children were not named in any will or trust. Are they entitled to anything, or does the court have to make the decision? How does it work?
Well, yeah. So we would look at the statute, and if he's not married and he has children, they're going to receive a portion of it. So you've got to look at the state statute as far as what they're going to receive. If they're his children, they're going to receive something out of the estate. And the bad part is that if he's named no one, then someone has to oversee those funds until they reach the age of 18, because we can't just write a 6-year-old a check.
Yeah, and it's sad. I mean, like his children are growing up. They're going through this tragedy. Their dad just passes away. Of course, legal court proceedings, and there's the other side of it too, right? Like, I mean, who takes guardianship of the children? This is all done in your will and trust as well, right?
It should be done in your will, correct? In your will or trust, but yes. And so if no one is named, that's when you have the fighting, the bickering, because, 2 sides of a family may say, hey, we are the best guardians for this child. And so now we've got, some litigation going on as far as who the court is going to deem the person who can handle these children for the rest of their life, or at least until they're 18.
Gotcha. So in this case, the 2 children did go to Lauren London. She just has a brand new movie out on Netflix. Beautiful girl. I'm happy that the children are in, good, safe home, with Lauren London. But yeah, it's sad. I mean, personal story. The reason that I actually decided to get my will and trust and my articles in place is because the last thing I want, Benny, is for my family to be fighting and bickering. And I think it said, I read something the other day. They were saying, if you love your family or you don't love your family, don't do a will and trust, because they will be fighting for years after your death, right?
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
You don't want them to be fighting after your death. You want to make sure to have a plan in place. I mean, here business owners are creating assets and, creating these businesses and making money and helping people, but don't have something for after the fact. And I think that for me, I've always been that person that I don't want to just leave things vaguely open for interpretation,
Yeah, exactly.
Because you'll have 2 family members say, wait a minute, my brother or my, my son, he left that for me. Like, wait, he talked to me at a lunch, and he told me he was going to leave that, right?
Right, exactly.
So have you seen those cases? Like, people, bickering and fighting over stuff like that?
Oh, absolutely. It happens, all the time, where nothing in writing, and everyone says, well, he promised me this, he promised me that. And even if it's vague, they will argue over jewelry or, even small things, furniture. I want this. Well, mom said I could have that. And so that, even over little things, people are going to fight. And so it's best to have something written down.
Can you put anything in a will and trust? You could put it in a trust, right? Or how does that work? Like if I wanted to put a card collection, like if I had Mickey Mantle's, rookie card, like, can I put that in a trust?
Yeah, you can distribute it according to the trust. You can, because you're naming all your personal property as part of the trust. And so you're going to list, who you want to have that rare card, who's going to receive it upon your passing. Otherwise, a Mickey Mantle rare card is going to be worth some money.
Right.
They're going to be fighting over it. Who's going to receive that?
Right. Wow, this is awesome. Now, of course, it always comes up like, are will and trusts just made out for people that are wealthy, or can anybody do a will and trust?
Anyone can do a will and trust, and everyone should, at a minimum, have a will.
Gotcha.
And that's because you get to name who's going to be in charge of your estate and also who's going to receive your assets. At a minimum, it still has to go through probate. But most people who have a house and kids should, at a minimum, get a consultation on the difference. We can go through, you can meet with an attorney, ask them questions, how it's going to affect you, what the benefits are, to make sure you understand. So at least you understand the options available.
Gotcha. I know, and it's like a common misconception that everybody thinks that, I'm going to get a trust when I have this much assets, right?
Right.
When I have 3 or 4 homes or a big estate. But that's not necessarily true. I mean, here we do, mortgages for people, and they put their house in their name, but then there's no plan after the fact, right?
Correct.
And of course, if you leave it to nobody, then at the end of the day, just like we're saying, it's it's going to be left to the state to figure out what to do with this asset, So I mean, in my opinion, just like you're saying, Benny, you should at least go get a consultation and figure out what is it, or if a trust or a will is right for you, right?
Correct.
Because at the end of the day, leaving things vague, it makes it difficult for everybody. So in my opinion, right now, what I think that at the very, very bare minimum, just like Benny's saying, getting a will, talking to an attorney, talking to Benny about a will and trust, getting your assets in place, because the last thing you want to do is to have your family fighting for nothing. I mean, if you really love your family, money comes and goes, but your family will always be there. Don't make them fight for what you've already accomplished in your life.
Absolutely.
Let them enjoy it.
Yes.
Let them enjoy it.
I would agree with that.
So, Benny, you know what? I'm going to thank you, man. I so appreciate you making the time to come out here with me. I know you had a little drive down here, but I think this is very exciting for people to understand that there's another way of doing things. It's not just the same way every single time of doing nothing. I'm going to purchase assets and not put them in a safe place. So I want to thank you for coming out. I do have a gift for you. Anybody that comes on the podcast, I do have a gift for them. So I have a gift for you.
Appreciate that.
Don't thank me. Thank my wife. My wife did it, not me. But she's very thoughtful like that. So, but thank you so much, Benny, for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. Thank you.